Hi, and thank you for joining us today. The purpose of today's webcast is to talk about the impact of COVID-19, the impact that it's had on our personal lives and on our work lives, not least of which the way we're having to work together these days. As we're adapting to sort of new modes of operation, unfortunately, so are cyber criminals. They're making significant changes in the way they work to take advantage of the potentially relaxed security arrangements with having lots and lots of people working from home. Recent surveys done by people like Trustwave have shown the significant increases in cybercrime activity, and we all need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from those. As an MSP, you'll be having these conversations with your clients, and so today is about giving you some advice and some guidance on how you can best advise your clients in order to ensure that they follow your advice and take your recommendations in keeping their network secure. So joining us today are four experts in the cybersecurity space, and what I'll do is run their profiles up as I'm introducing them. If you want to read the information on their profile slides in a little more detail, simply press pause and then you can press play again. So coming up first is Simon Newman from the Police Crime Prevention Initiatives, and he's been working in this space for many, many years, spent much of his career in law enforcement, leading major business change projects. After that, we have Melanie Oldman joining us. She is CEO and founder of Bob's Business, a cyber ed tech company. Melanie has over 15 years experience in the cybersecurity industry and holds multiple advisory board positions supporting industry and government. Up after that is Erin Farragon. So Erin is the Executive Vice President of SIGRA, and he's nearly 20 years experience in the data protection and recovery space. And then finally, last but not least, is Mark Saville. Mark is the Managing Director of Data to Vault and is a member of the advisory board for the Police Digital Security Centre and has been working in the backup space for many, many years. So let's begin with Simon. Simon, there's no doubt that cybercrime has become one of the fastest growing problems affecting businesses of all sizes. As we are increasingly reliant on technology, criminals have moved away from traditional forms of crime, finding new ways to exploit weaknesses and vulnerabilities for financial gain. Simon, just how big a problem is cybercrime globally, and what are law enforcement doing to address it?
Thank you, Nigel. As you can see from the slide, the growth in cybercrime over the past few years has seen it become a consistent feature in global threat assessments alongside terrorism and pandemic flu. It presents significant challenges for businesses of all sizes, with many of them failing to put in place basic control measures, often making it easy for the criminal to exploit. As we become more dependent on technology, the decision to use a managed service provider is a natural step for many businesses. Unfortunately, criminals also know this is where the most valuable data sits, and MSPs are now a key target for attackers. So, how does the law enforcement community deal with the scale and the nature of the problem, and what are the challenges we face? The figures on this slide are taken from the UK, but are similar to figures we have seen elsewhere. The first figure is the total number of incidents of cybercrime in fraud in the past 12 months. It represents almost half of all crime in England and Wales, yet we believe that only 12 to 13% of these incidents end up getting reported to the relevant authorities. This second figure is the number of businesses who have suffered at least one cyber attack or breach in the past year. It's risen from 32% a year ago and shows just how hard the business community has been hit. And this final figure is a consequence of the underreporting I mentioned a moment ago. From 4.8 million incidents of cybercrime and fraud, there were just 65 convictions last year. Almost a third of these convictions were police officers unlawfully accessing databases. As we saw with the last slide, law enforcement faces an unprecedented challenge when dealing with cybercrime. The nature and scale of the problem creates a number of unique challenges that mean we are only ever dealing with the tip of the iceberg. Recent data from Europol, for example, suggests that the average age of a cybercriminal is just 17. Many offenders are opportunists, learning their tradecraft from the internet. Short, non-custodial sentences mean they are often free to continue to offend within days of weeks or weeks of being caught. Cybercrime is a truly global problem, creating another challenge for law enforcement and governments. Traditional geographical boundaries are no longer relevant. Criminals can and do operate anywhere in the world. And this makes it extremely difficult to bring offenders to justice. Extradition can be lengthy, complicated, and often very problematic. We also have a huge skills shortage. Obtaining evidence is increasingly technically challenging. The number of devices in use today, compared to 10 years ago, means it can take officers several weeks to extract all the data and then analyse it. There simply aren't the number of officers with the right skills to deal with that demand. And even when we do catch them, sentences tend to be short. The two individuals here on the left-hand side were part of a larger gang who launched a ransomware attack against a major ISP a few years ago. It's estimated that the total cost of their attack was just under $100 million, and they received just 12 months and 8 months in prison. As a result, law enforcement has had to adapt. On the left-hand side, you'll see 4 boxes. These represent what we call the 4 Ps of policing. They are how we generally respond to threats, whether that threat is due to terrorism or cybercrime, and are pretty consistent on a global scale with law enforcement agencies in other countries. Because of the challenges I've just described, we now focus on the first 3 Ps: prepare, protect, prevent. We haven't given up catching bad guys, but we know the best thing we can do is to reduce the vulnerability of businesses in becoming yet another victim. But we are also fighting back in other ways. For example, we now publicly identify the source of cyber attacks when a nation state is behind it, and we can be confident that that's where the attack can be traced from. And finally, the COVID-19 pandemic shows us how quickly cyber criminals are in exploiting current situation and crisis that we find ourselves in. The figures on this slide are already out of date. Since the beginning of March, more than $2.5 million has been lost by over 1,000 individuals in cybercrimes directly related to COVID-19. That amounts to roughly 5% of all fraud that we're currently seeing. And we believe the actual figure to be significantly higher. In these few slides that I've shown, we've seen how big a problem cybercrime has become and how effective the criminals have been in exploiting vulnerabilities and weaknesses. But there is no silver bullet that will make the problem go away.
So, Melanie, we've heard from Simon, the picture is pretty bleak. And I know there are lots of MSPs that have some great tech to stop criminals getting in. But what can technology and what can we do as individuals to substantially reduce risk and impact?
Yeah, there's a lot we can do on an individual basis in order to reduce risk and vulnerability, but also to reduce the impact of cybercrime on ourselves and also on our businesses. But there is a lot we can do in the training, awareness and educational piece that changes the mindsets of individuals to reduce their vulnerability, susceptibility, but also how they handle security breaches in order to be able to minimize the impact to an organization. So the thing we need to bear in mind that cyber criminals have ways and means of bypassing technology, and that's using social engineering techniques to get directly at end users in order to get into systems without actually having to hack anything other than the human. And what we have here is that what we've seen since February of this year, a staggering 667% increase in cyber attacks directly related to phishing. And what they're doing is they're using this time of fear and uncertainty that we have, playing on those emotions and encouraging us to click on links that download malicious software onto the systems. And what we need to do is we need to use those emotions that put us at risk and work out how we can utilize those emotions for people to make the positive and right decision. This is very much about how do you empower people to make the right decision and the right call, but in the event of something bad happening, that they actually take the right corrective action to reduce risk. So what we had historically was sort of this very secure, protected bubble of the office environment, individuals understanding the controls in place, understanding that technology that you had a wraparound and it was relatively secure. The pandemic happened so quickly that we suddenly shift to mobile working, and actually it's more important for business to continue than necessarily taking and making sure that all the security controls we had within the working environment are followed through. What we also have is a lot more users that have devices, equipment that don't have the security controls, the security patches. They're using their own devices. So you have that mix between work and play. So communications that are coming through are sort of a little bit jumbled, which increases the susceptibility. But also people, it's proven that people are a little bit more comfortable in their working environment. Their guards are slightly down. So again, that makes them more susceptible to social engineering attacks. We've been running simulated phishing attacks for a number of years, and I think the key thing to remember is about positive simulated phishing attacks and making sure that you're not naming and shaming and you're doing it in a really positive educational way. So it's about getting people to know that it's a collective collaborative approach, that you're all in it together, and actually it takes, the masses in order to change this behavior. Because what you want to happen, what we've shown here, is from a series of phishing campaigns that went out to over 80,000 users over a number of campaigns. There was an initial opening base rate where 40+% of people were clicking on links, and that was actually reduced down to 10%, which is a staggering almost 75% reduction in risk, which is fantastic. But the problem you still have is you still have 25% that are getting through, that are causing risks, that are getting malicious software onto devices. So what happens in those instances, and what you need to know, is that end users are actually going to sort of embrace that. They're going to tell people that it's happening, because how quickly can you respond is what's going to save your reputational damage, but also make sure that you get the right solutions in place to be able to recover and back up the information that you have. So it's really, really important that people identify and recognize potential what the threats are. Then they've got a heightened sense of awareness. But in the event that something goes wrong, it goes back to Simon's point, is there is no silver bullet. So it's about this ecosystem of protection you put around an organization, and actually realizing individuals are at the heart of this, because they can, especially in circumstances like we are in now, people are playing on emotions, and they're finding the easiest way to attack is through the human. So it's very much about making sure people know what to do in the event of a breach. And then obviously, when that doesn't happen, you then go to recovery backup, which I believe Mark's going to talk about now. Thank you.
Melanie, thanks for that. It was really interesting to see those figures. Erin, how does a SIGRA approach product development to address the current cyber ecosystem needs of service providers and end users?
Well, I think we're trying to take a higher level approach. I think from a product development, lately we've been very focused on security, attempting to address the attacks on backup as a category, not just the SIGRA, but our peers across all the different backup vendors. I've recognized, I think, that backup's kind of become the second most favored target of the ransomware bad actors. And the reason is if they try to delete your backups or make them non-recoverable, you're going to have to pay the ransom. So it's very efficient for them to do that. They started with the end customers, and they continue to attack end customers, but as you've early on indicated, now moved on into MSPs, because an MSP and attacking an MSP through an end customer is very efficient for them. They can attack an MSP and get to 200, 500, or 1,000 or more customers. So it's a lot more efficient. So one of the things that are happening is that backup vendors have addressed this because of attacks of backup software is coming to a couple of different things. And now when you're looking at your backup software, and everybody's got some form of backup, whether it's a memory stick or whether it's a proper backup software vendor that they've been working with for a number of years, or has a really big brand or a smaller brand or whatever, there's a couple of things that folks should be looking at in their backup vendor, whatever vendor they're using. One of the things, and maybe the first thing to do, is to make sure that you're not backing up already infected data, so that you're not infecting your backups. This kind of an attack is called an attack loop. And what happens is the bad guys leave, they get in through phishing. It's that almost 25% that doesn't get caught, and they get in somehow through the front door or through existing systems, regardless of what efforts we're making. And they put ransomware and viruses stay there, and they're undetected. They're very good at hiding themselves. And whatever backup software just backs it up like regular data. And then your backup repository gets infected. And then after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months even, it detonates. And then they say, give me the money, or give us the Bitcoins or whatever currency. And then you say, no, I have a backup. And lo and behold, your backup is still there. Maybe you've been keeping multiple copies, and some of them are in different media or different air gaps. But even those, as you bring them in and you restore them into your production environments, they're infected. because you've been backing them up for 3, 6, 9 months. And so you're really recovering. You're taking that syringe and you're re-injecting it into your bloodstream, and you're recovering infected backups right into your production. So that's an attack loop. You want to make sure that attack loops are prevented and that you're not infecting. Having 3, 2, 1 or multiple copies, even air gap copies, is not enough because they get infected because of these delayed times. Another thing that to do is to make sure your backup software has multi-factor or two-factor authentication. And that's because the bad guys are stealing credentials. And one of the credentials that they love stealing are the credentials to the backup software, whatever software it might be. Once they have access to the backup software, they go in pretending like they're a legitimate user, and they delete 5-year-old, 7-year-old backup repositories in all copies of them. So make sure that you're protecting access. Another thing to do is make sure you have immutable storage. And this is the original attacks. What was happening is the bad guys were basically finding the backup copies and they were deleting them with encryption, or encrypting them, which is in effect deleting them. And so if you have immutable copies, if your backup repositories, or if you're a service provider, if the storage or the repository that you have is immutable, it cannot be changed, cannot be deleted, even through encryption. So you got to make sure that you have that capability. Couple of other things to look for: make sure that the repository, whether it's sitting at the MSP or whether it's sitting at the customer site, but make sure that the repository name can be changed, making it a moving target. There have been multiple attacks where the bad guys know that the default repository name, the directory name, has a specific name structure or even name, and they basically launch payloads looking for the specific repository names, and then they delete them or they encrypt them. So make sure that your names of the repositories can be changed. It's much harder to hit a moving target than a sitting duck. Another thing to do is to make sure that you have capabilities in your backup software that enables what are called soft deletes. So even if they steal the credentials and they log into your backup software pretending to be legitimate users, that when they click delete, it's not really deleted. It's actually moved to a different directory, to a different location, which is unknown to them. And then they think it's been deleted. Then they detonate their payload. They stick a gun in your face, so to speak. And then they think you can't recover because they think they deleted your backup data. Well, they have not. Better backup software allows you to have soft deletes. And you can actually, as an MSP or as an end user, then recover that data, again, giving you confidence in the ability to recover. Finally, and then reverting back to earlier comment, I think, Nigel, is that MSPs are a very efficient target for the bad guys, and there are multiple growing attacks on MSPs because of that efficiency. And one of the things that they're doing is they're attacking MSP targets through their RMM, remote monitoring and management, which is a very common service that MSPs deliver these days. So what they do is they hack into, or they get access to, the RMM probes, the agents that are monitoring printers, firewalls, routers, switches, machines. And there's many of them at the customer site. They're not very well protected in most cases. They use them as a proxy to get into the MSP. And in many cases, MSPs that have an RMM platform may also be using a pre-integrated backup capability from their RMM vendor. There are many RMM vendors that also have backup capabilities. And so what they're doing is they're basically, again, a proxy. Through the RMM, they basically jump over into the backup application, because in many cases, the RMM credentials are the same for monitoring as they are for backup. Away they go. They start deleting hundreds or thousands of customers' backups. And then that is a common attack that's happening. So one of the ways of doing it is making sure that you have a different vendor than your RMM vendor for your backup, so that they're not easily used as a proxy. So these are the kind of different techniques or tactics that are ways of mitigating the risk of having your backup attacked or infected, and giving you more confidence. And so if you don't have these functions or these tactics, or if you haven't turned them on, or if they're not even available from your incumbent vendor, you should start exploring different vendors and different options.
Aaron, thanks for that. And so, Mark, what are the recent developments that are impacting the backup and the disaster recovery sector at the moment? And then are there any specific things that we need to watch out for during the COVID-19 lockdown and beyond?
So thanks very much, Nigel, and thanks for everybody leading into this slide. Our experience so far is we've seen a number of the attacks manifest themselves in the way that Erin has described them. We often find that our services are installed alongside other backups, allows us to see what's actually going on in the marketplace. So the marketplace at the moment, there's tiers of recovery, I think, that we're seeing in the marketplace. Every client has a different requirement. Often they're driving towards reducing the recovery time objective, how long it takes to get their data back so the systems are back up and running and the users are working again, and how long they're prepared to see the data lost for, which is the recovery time objective. So we see the replication of virtual machines. We see technology that delivers almost instantaneous recovery, often embedded in appliances with SSD type storage. And these systems, if they're fully operational and work as they're intended, and we can deliver these services, provide recovery times in seconds or minutes. But we do see that in pretty much every instance, because of the architecture behind them and the way that they operate and their need to create images almost on a minute by minute basis, that they're very vulnerable to the ransomware attack. Very good if you get a hardware failure, more than capable in the event of a fire or a flood. So the traditional disaster recovery scenarios, these technology solutions work very well. But what we have seen is that there's absolutely a need for a third tier, I would say, of recovery, which is that you, in the instance of a ransomware attack, especially a ransomware attack with the hidden code, as Erin has described, where the objective from the ransomware hackers is to create an attack loop of reinfection, that there really is a need to take backup at a file level. And in doing that, to scan that data on the way into the backup service and to scan it again on the way out. The idea being that in the event that you do suffer a ransomware attack and your replication systems or your CDM instant recovery systems bring you back infected data that reinfects the network, ultimately you're left with the option to be able to go and rebuild systems from scratch, format the servers, install the virtual machines and operating systems, install the application, and then know that you're going to be restoring a clean, scanned version of your data. Really interesting for us. It's almost impossible to replicate that testing in a lab. And the big problem that you're going to have with testing, which is really critical to this type of recovery, is to simulate that with replication and CDM. It would prove to be very, very difficult. But you can absolutely do it in a non-disruptive way with the attack loop solution. So what we have seen over the last 5 or 6 weeks is a complete shift in the level of inquiries that we've received in. Those inquiries are at probably a greater level than they were from prior to the lockdown. The shift at such short notice to working from home has driven a lot of organisations to deploy or adopt home workers systems. I think the figures that we're seeing currently is that in about 65% of cases, people are actually working from home from their home computers. And in another study that we'd seen, that they usually have about a 40% infection rate with malware. So these are very vulnerable, these systems, and they were never designed for corporate access. We see users at home being susceptible to phishing, and the remote access protocols are one of the attack vectors that hackers use. So what we have seen is a big increase in the demand for laptop and desktop backup, which we're able to roll out. Office 365 adoption, I think the last time I looked, there were about 700% increase in Azure adoption, which is largely Office 365. And in the event that the users working from home are synchronizing that data and loading it into the corporate network file servers, given that they have a high likelihood of malware being present on unpatched home systems, there really is the need now to add the attack loop scanning capability for Windows file systems, file data, because there's a good chance that that data that's being loaded up from the users remotely will contain some form of malware. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Thanks very much, Nigel.
And thank you for everyone that's presented today. And what we've done, just to sort of pull things all together for you, is developed a 4-point plan to help you combat the evolving ransomware threat that's out there today. The first stage of that really is to make sure that your teams and your clients are aware of the evolving threat that's out there and that they're vigilant to it. And that really comes through making sure they're aware of the size and scope of the threat. Follow that up with some training, make sure that your teams, again, know what to do, know what to be looking for. Perhaps look at ethical phishing tests to see how they're doing, to see whether they are really following the advice that you're providing to them. And then it's about making sure that you've got the right backup software and services in place that can combat the evolving threats that we're facing. It is, after all, the data that's the most important piece on this. If you can't restore your data, if you are attacked, then there's a real problem that's going to be coming through. So hopefully this 4-point plan will help to structure the conversations with your teams and with those of your clients. Thank you again for your time today. And just to round off, we've provided the contact details for all 4 presenters today. If you've got any questions that you would like answers to, get in touch with them. I'm sure they will help you in any way that they can. So thank you very much for your time and keep safe.